once the new variant was flagged, the US announced a travel ban coming out of South Africa and some other countries. So since that travel ban was implemented, what has the effect of it been on South Africa and those other affected countries?
The immediate reaction to the announcement of the variant was just outrageous. And it was an overreaction. I was, taken aback that, they would take this kind of action, because what it's basically saying to the rest of the world, that in future, if you have good surveillance systems and you have in place the mechanisms to identify a new variant and to identify it early, then whatever you do, don't tell the world, keep it secret. Let some other country do the announcement so that, you don't have to bear the burden of the reaction that we've had. Because, what it basically is doing is punishing South Africa and making South Africa take the economic impact. And what makes it more ridiculous is that this variant is now spreading in many countries, including those that have instituted the ban. I think the part that got me was that when the world is facing a threat, that's the time that we need to stand together against the virus. Instead, we are standing against each other. We are building fences. We are building barriers where we really should be building bridges, and we should be finding ways to work with each other to solve this problem.
Do you think this is creating a perverse set of incentives where the next country that might discover a new variant will be less motivated to be as transparent or as quick in identifying it?
I think the way in which South Africa has had to deal with the impact. I think at one stage we had about 40 countries that had banned travel from South Africa. The net effect is a huge economic loss, especially because it's our holiday season. We get a lot of travelers at this time of the year. So what we are saying to the world is there's nothing to be gained by establishing surveillance systems to identify variants like this. All you will get is punishment. So don't do it. That's the message, actually.
During a press briefing, White House spokesperson Jen Psaki said the intent of the ban wasn't to punish, but to buy the US time. Given that the US has already found evidence of the variant within the country, how fair is that argument?
So I think the travel ban may have, and it's a big if, may have some short-term benefit. And it'll be very short-term, if any, in reducing the initial seeding of the virus. The virus is already seeded, so that's not you can't undo that, because the virus has spread before we even knew it existed. And of course, most people who spread it are not even symptomatic, so they don't know that they're spreading it. What's at issue here is that even if it has an impact, even if it has some benefit, it will be so small and so short-lived that it's really not worth implementing. And it's a big if it does have any benefit. So I think it was counterproductive. It led to a situation of bad faith, and it was a blow for science. It was a blow for transparency. And instead of us as scientists, discussing with our British counterparts, how we're going to deal with the variant, we are discussing with them what information do they need to lift the travel ban? It's distracting us from the task at hand.
As you might know, like in that same press briefing, the issue of vaccine access came up, and the White House has said like they had offered South Africa a vaccine. But my next question, I'm sorry to say, isn't about South Africa. It's about neighboring Botswana. Botswana was one of the countries that was hit with the travel ban. However, Botswana had also asked the White House for more vaccine help, as recently as August. What do you see as the role of the US in boosting vaccination rates around the world, and is it living up to that?
It's a very unusual situation. When faced with a pandemic, your most powerful weapon against this threat, needs to have a systematic way in which it is made available and distributed. You cannot take your most powerful weapon and put it in the hands of pharmaceutical executives to distribute, because they have a different set of objectives than public health goals. And that's what we've basically done. We've said to the world, the way we will distribute the benefits of a vaccine is that we'll let the private companies do it. And so that's what we have. We are in a situation where the distribution systems and the beneficiation of the tools like a vaccine, have taken us down a path where it has really become dysfunctional, and it has become counterproductive to dealing with a pandemic, because you cannot deal with a pandemic, in any way in which only one country or a handful of countries vaccinate their populations while the virus is running rampant in other countries. That's no solution to a pandemic. So whatever it is, it's not with a public health objective in mind. And that's what worries me, that when you're dealing with a pandemic, the decision-making and the way in which you drive your decisions should be guided by public health imperatives. We are trying to slow and stop a global pandemic. That's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to stop a pandemic in one country or in a few countries. Now, I've often heard this argument that, we are getting vaccines, but don't worry, we'll donate vaccines to you, and as part of a conscience easing measure. And so what happens is that wealthy countries have stockpiled vaccines and have large numbers of doses in stockpiles. And they kept those stockpiles because they didn't know whether they would need boosters. They didn't know, when it would be approved for children. So they just bought vaccines and stockpiled them. And what happens sometimes, and it's not all the time, but sometimes, is that as vaccines are nearing their expiration date, that's when we suddenly find that, no, there are vaccines available for donation. And so when those vaccines come to Africa with short expiration dates, they are a real challenge to distribute, because the healthcare infrastructure is much weaker in Africa, so it takes longer to do things. So we don't want to find that, while we're trying to do all of this, we end up with a situation where the vaccines are actually expiring.